With the Trump-Kim summit now less than 1 month away, excitement and hopes are building. But there are both risks and rewards to this high-stakes diplomacy. And we want to discuss that with Admiral Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Presidents Bush and Obama. Admiral, welcome back.
Good to be with you.
You just heard Secretary Pompeo, and President Trump is also talking with growing optimism about his summit with Chairman Kim. Take a look.
I think it's going to be a very big success. But my attitude is, and if it isn't, it isn't. Okay?
What do you think are the prospects for a Trump-Kim summit? What are the prospects that this will work out, that Kim will give up, as you just heard the Secretary say, give up his nuclear program and agree to give us means to verify it?
I think it's really uncertain. I want to give President Trump credit for getting to this point. He's moved the needle on this when that has not been done in the past, but I also think given the stakes, it's a very much high risk, high reward opportunity, and I think the downsides potentially are really, really significant as well.
All right, I want to talk to you about that because you gave a speech in Washington this week, and you talked about what could happen if this summit falls apart, if they walk away from Singapore without a deal. Let me put it up on the screen. If the talks do fall apart, excuse me, you didn't cough, I did. The failure is likely to stir the president's most bellicose, aggressive instincts. Are you saying, Admiral, that if there is no deal, that we could be worse off than if there had been no summit in the first place?
I think what I'm saying is if the talks fail, that the likelihood of options are dramatically reduced to potential conflict. And that's a huge worry. I think despite the progress that's been made to try to understand Kim Jong-un, there's a lot we don't understand. And that he would be significantly different from his father and his grandfather to make the kind of changes that are being discussed would be a huge, huge shift. And I'm more skeptical than I am optimistic that he would do that. That said, it could happen, but I do worry about the downside of conflict breaking out, where tens and hundreds of thousands of people, particularly in South Korea, could die very quickly. And Kim has a huge arsenal to include nuclear, chemical, biological weapons, and that the outbreak there could be huge. And I don't know that we've had much of a debate in the country about the potential outbreak of nuclear war, use of nuclear weapons, which haven't been used since 1945.
But you have said, you're on the record as saying that you do not believe in the feasibility, the utility of trying to contain North Korea, that we can't live with North Korea as an active nuclear threat. So if this agreement were to fall apart, what would you have President Trump do?
Well, I mean, I'm not really sure. Those are the stakes that we're playing for right now. I really want this agreement, or I want the result to be denuclearization complete, exactly what the president's seeking, and also not have any outbreak of war. That's a pretty thin lane to get into, particularly if the talks break down. I also think we need to put as much pressure on China to ensure that there is no combat outbreak, and certainly include our allies in Japan as well as the South Koreans in generating this kind of outcome. What I'm most concerned about is if this doesn't result in a positive outcome, the potential for, I think, military conflict goes up, and therefore you get into whether or not he would use the nuclear weapons.
Do you think, I mean, the question I have is, would we be better off, because you're saying if we get together and it falls apart, then there's not much more to talk about. Would it be better not to have the summit? Are you suggesting that maybe we're doing this too quickly?
Well, I think actually that's a hypothetical at this point. I think we're going to have it. It's another 30 days. There's going to be 30 days of prognosis about the pluses and the minuses here, but I am convinced it's going to happen, and I want to try to I want to try to understand what potential outcomes could be, both on the upside and the downside.
Let's turn to Iran and President Trump's decision to pull out of the nuclear deal with Tehran. Here he is.
It is clear to me that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. The Iran deal is defective at its core.
You were the former chairman, you were the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. With the president's decision to pull out of the deal, has the risk of Iran developing a nuclear weapon, has it increased or diminished?
I think it's increased. I think it's actually increased fairly dramatically. I think one of the things we forget is how bright and capable the Iranians are, and that they can rebound from setbacks pretty quickly technically, and I think their capability could be developed very, very rapidly.
But you have criticized Iran for continuing its its missile program, its ballistic missile program, and that the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, did not stop that. It clearly did not curtail Iran's bad actions across the Middle East and its support for terror groups in a number of countries. Aren't there flaws in the deal that President Obama and John Kerry negotiated that had to be addressed?
I think we lose the context, if you will, of the JCPOA, which was very specifically focused on the nuclear weapons. And those weapons are so devastating that that focus, I think, was very well deserved. The other thing that I'm concerned about is if Iran gets nuclear weapons, that it will proliferate nuclear weapons in the region. So that's one thing. Secondly, we ought to press them as hard as possible to push back, bring as much pressure on their nefarious activities with respect to terrorism and support of terrorists, as well as their missile program, and do that with every available capability. And Iran has not acted well since the implementation of the JCPOA outside its requirements. Everyone I've spoken to says Iran is in full compliance with the specifics of the JCPOA, which eliminates their ability to develop nuclear weapons over a period of time.
Of course, the period of time ends, and that's one of the concerns of President Trump, is that in 2025 you have the sunset clause, and that apparently was the issue that broke us apart from the European allies, and that's when the president decided to pull out.
Yeah, I think clearly, eyes wide open, we knew going in that there was a sunset aspect of this. 10 years is a long time in some ways to look at it, in which case you would hope that there would be developments where they wouldn't develop once that sunset sunset clause went into effect.
I want to ask you about two other issues while I have you. What do you think of Gina Haspel's nomination to head the CIA, and do you believe, as some Democrats did in the confirmation hearing this week, that her involvement in enhanced interrogation after 9/11 somehow disqualifies her?
I've aligned myself with John McCain, Senator John McCain, for a long time on views of torture and what the standard is. He is the gold standard there, so I'm very supportive of the position he's taken in that regard. And I recognize lots of intelligence professionals I've talked to think Gina is an extraordinary person with a great background. That said, she has a past, and then recently, while she stated that she was in compliance with the law, where I think Senator McCain is where I am, that morally it was wrong, it was torture, and that she should be held responsible for that.
And therefore should not be the CIA director?
I'm not voting. I'll let those that vote make that decision.
But you would say that what you did was wrong?
I'm very much where Senator McCain is.
I'm sure that someone is going to note after your appearance here that back in 2016, Michael Bloomberg considered running for president, and he at one point vetted you as a possible running mate. So I'm sure someone's going to say, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond, hey, you're a never-Trumper.
No, I'm not. Actually, I'm not a never-Trumper. Never said that, and worked hard to try to stay out of the politics of all this, quite frankly.
And so what is your attitude towards the president and the fact that you apparently were thinking of running with Michael Bloomberg?
Well, that was a time that I was focused with Michael Bloomberg on the possibilities. It never really came to fruition, and in the end, I honestly came to a point with my family that it really wasn't my kind of life, or that we would pursue anything like that.
Admiral Mullen, thank you. Thank you for coming in today and pursuing this life and talking to us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss a foreign policy landscape that is shifting rapidly.